The political and legal spotlight in the United States has intensified dramatically as former President Bill Clinton prepares to face lawmakers in connection with the expanding congressional investigation tied to disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein, creating a moment that analysts, historians, and legal observers describe as both historically rare and symbolically powerful. Because appearances by former presidents before legislative investigators are extraordinarily uncommon and typically occur only when broader institutional questions demand answers beyond ordinary political boundaries. And this development has once again thrust the Epstein case back into global headlines years after his death, reminding the public that the scandal was never limited to a single individual, but instead represented a complex web of relationships, influence, privilege, and systemic failures that allowed troubling allegations to persist for decades without decisive intervention. As lawmakers now attempt to reconstruct a clearer and more comprehensive understanding of Epstein's connections with political leaders, business executives, philanthropists, and cultural figures whose interactions with him have long fueled public speculation and mistrust. And although Clinton has consistently denied any awareness of Epstein's criminal activities and has publicly stated that he ended contact well before the financier's conduct became widely exposed, investigators are expected to examine the broader context of their association, including meetings, charitable initiatives, diplomatic discussions, and multiple trips referenced in widely discussed flight records, not as accusations of wrongdoing, but as part of a larger effort to establish timelines and determine how Epstein cultivated credibility among influential institutions. And legal experts emphasize that congressional testimony in such circumstances often serves a fact-finding function rather than a prosecutorial one. Yet the optics of a former president answering questions about past associations underscores how deeply the scandal has shaken public confidence in elite accountability, reflecting a cultural shift in which citizens increasingly demand transparency from individuals once considered beyond scrutiny. While supporters of Clinton argue that decades-old relationships are being re-examined through the lens of modern awareness and caution against turning investigative processes into political theater, critics maintain that accountability requires full disclosure regardless of status, illustrating the broader tension between due process and public expectation that now defines many high-profile investigations. And the probe itself has evolved into a wider examination of institutional oversight failures, including how law enforcement agencies, financial regulators, and social networks responded or failed to respond to warning signs that emerged long before Epstein's final arrest, prompting renewed questions about whether influence and reputation discouraged deeper investigation at earlier stages. And congressional leaders have framed the inquiry as an attempt to rebuild trust by demonstrating that democratic institutions are capable of confronting uncomfortable truths openly, even when doing so involves individuals who once held immense authority. While historians note that former presidents traditionally avoid congressional testimony to preserve the separation between executive leadership and legislative oversight, meaning this appearance could establish a precedent influencing how future administrations and former leaders engage with investigative bodies long after leaving office. And negotiations surrounding the format of the testimony continue to attract attention, with discussions reportedly focused on whether questioning will occur publicly before cameras or privately behind closed doors, a decision carrying significant implications, because a televised hearing could dominate global media cycles and intensify partisan reactions, while a closed session might encourage more detailed and less performative dialogue. And beyond Washington politics, the moment reflects a broader societal reckoning with power structures in the digital age, where investigative journalism, social media scrutiny, and public activism have fundamentally changed how scandals evolve and how historical relationships are reassessed. As survivors' advocacy organizations continue urging lawmakers and commentators to prioritize justice and systemic reform rather than personality-driven narratives, emphasizing that the core issue remains the protection of vulnerable individuals and the prevention of future abuses rather than political point scoring. And sociologists observing the case argue that Epstein's rise within elite social circles reveals how prestige and philanthropy can sometimes mask misconduct, demonstrating how social validation within powerful networks can delay skepticism and create environments where accountability becomes complicated. while economists and governance experts suggest the investigation also reflects broader questions about transparency standards in modern leadership, particularly as citizens increasingly expect public figures to explain past associations in ways that were rarely demanded in previous generations. And media coverage surrounding Clinton's expected testimony has already begun shaping political narratives across party lines, with some commentators portraying the event as evidence of institutional strength and others warning of deepening polarization depending on how the hearing unfolds, highlighting how even investigative procedures now operate within a highly charged political environment where perception often carries as much influence as factual findings. And legal scholars emphasize that congressional investigations frequently aim to create a detailed historical record rather than immediate legal outcomes, meaning the significance of this testimony may emerge gradually as documents, statements, and timelines contribute to future historical analysis of the Epstein era and its intersection with American political culture. And as anticipation builds both domestically and internationally, observers recognize that the hearing represents more than a single individual's testimony. It symbolizes an evolving expectation that influence does not eliminate accountability, and that democratic institutions must continually reassess how they respond to allegations involving powerful figures, reinforcing a broader transformation in public ethics where transparency is increasingly viewed as essential to legitimacy. And regardless of the ultimate conclusions reached by investigators, the moment is likely to stand as a defining chapter in the ongoing effort to understand how one of the most controversial scandals of the modern era unfolded, why warning signs were missed or minimized, and how societies can strengthen safeguards moving forward, ensuring that the legacy of the Epstein investigation continues shaping conversations about justice, leadership responsibility, institutional reform, and the balance between privacy and public accountability in an era where information spreads instantly and historical actions remain subject to renewed examination, ultimately turning this testimony into not only a political event, but also a reflection of changing societal expectations about power, ethics, and the enduring demand for truth in democratic systems navigating the challenges of the 21st century.